Start again. Good afternoon, everybody. I don't think we need any introductions. All the councillors, we've got some officers giving reports. They'll introduce themselves as and when they give the reports. Apologies for absence. I've got Peter Malcolm Rochdale and Rebecca Moore.
No, sorry, that one.
Okay. Luke Rakes and Pam Stewart. And we've got a substitute, which is Peter. There we go, we got there. Thank you, that's great. Urgent business, not as such, just really the news of Darren Whitfield from Bolton, who died about a week ago, which is sad news really. Just to make sure everybody is aware of that. Certainly an email has gone out, we are all now aware of that. Just sad really, my thoughts, I guess the whole committee's thoughts, maybe we could minute it with his family. Dreadful news. So. But moving on from that, declarations of interest. We had the declarations of interest forms. Most are in. If any are we missing any at this point? Sorry. Okay.
Yes, I'm about two or three missing.
That's not bad going. So if we could, anybody that's not done it, if we could have a bit of focus on that over the coming month to get them in for next time round, that'd be great. And then on to the minutes. Have we all had a copy of the minutes? Have we all read them? Would somebody like to propose the minutes, please, from the last meeting? Don't rush.
Yeah, I'll propose.
Thank you for that, Yvonne. Seconded by John. That's great. Anybody got any comments on the minutes from the last meeting? No, that's great.
Yeah. I sent an apology, which has not been recorded. I'm sure I sent an email. Thank you.
Hello. And then...
there's a bit of an error. I think it's page 7 at the bottom. Special meeting of the combined authority.
Could you just put right?
Hang on. Could you do your microphone, John?
It should be, I looked at my diary, I think it should be Tuesday. Is it a Monday or a Tuesday? 20th of February. 17. Right. Just to make the point that I've read them, actually.
So can we alter that? I mean, pastors, we now alter. So, let's just move on to some proper formal business. Improving school readiness. We've got a report from... who's giving the report? We've got so many people. Charlotte,
yes,
thank you.
You've got a lot of people. Councillor Rishi Shuri was due to be here, so obviously would have opened. He may well arrive shortly. I was asked to come on Joanne Roney's behalf because she is the Chief Exec Lead for the Children's Agenda, and Chris is here because she is the lead among our DCS group for early years and school readiness. So if I just start and then hand over to Chris, and obviously Jane is here because she's been the Combined Authority lead around the work behind the scenes and the development of the transformation plan that we've been involved in. So is it okay if I just give an overview? So I suppose what I wanted to say is that early years and school readiness for children has been an ambition here in the Combined Authority for a number of years, and as Directors of Children's Services we've been absolutely committed to really progressing early years linked to the early years delivery model, and the report outlines that we have already made significant progress in improving school readiness within the Combined Authority, within each of our local authorities. Progress has been varied according to those different authorities, and the authorities that most needed improvement have now made significant improvement. However, there is a huge amount more to be done, which is the purpose of obviously bringing the paper here today. It is now a very significant mayoral priority, and I think we're delighted about that actually, because it does give a real opportunity to champion the needs of our very young children across the Combined Authority really effectively. And the paper outlines the details of the work that's been going on in relation to that, and I'll hand over to Chris, who's on the Early Years Board. I think it's now going to be the School Readiness Board, in order to go through some of that detail, and then Jane obviously is the one who's got the detail in terms of the transformation plan that's proposed in order to support the work into the next stage. Thank you, Chair. As Charlotte rightly says, the ambition across Greater Manchester regarding our our infants pre-birth up to 5 has been pretty sound in terms of a committed approach over many years, actually. And the research, the evidence base, is absolutely compelling that if pre-birth up to the age of 5, there's a very high quality parenting, early years opportunities, excellent health model for infants, then you can actually, it's not just about school readiness, it's about life readiness. What the 8-stage model that's described in this report presents for children and families across Greater Manchester is, the first stage is actually pre-birth. The 8th stage is the term before a child's 5th birthday. And throughout that 8th stage, it's about a really excellent delivery from health visitors, midwives, working in a team around the early years in each of our localities to, first of all, very importantly, identify vulnerability as early as possible. Then, most importantly, to say, okay, having identified vulnerability for babies, infants, parents, what's the delivery model then we offer at an 8-stage process, right from birth up to reception class. And as I say, the research and the evidence model is absolutely compelling in terms of turning round life chances, school readiness, and for the rest of, into adulthood. As the report indicates, this will require very detailed delivery with health colleagues. So this isn't just about local authorities and children's services. This is absolutely about integrating our offer with health colleagues. Co-production with parents, again, some of the research, the EPI study, that was the effective provision in early years, that dates back quite a long time ago, actually, the Head Start model. All of these show that where there is co-production in the early years with parents, working closely and respectfully with them, that again the life chances of children and school readiness are really enhanced. So that's probably as much as I want to say in terms of the 8-stage model. I can give a lot more detail if required. There's a section in the report that talks about preconception, which is an interesting ambition if you think about...
Early intervention is its finest.
Yeah, early intervention, an absolute miracle. However, there are important cohorts of mothers who we would actually like to be much more effective in our work with pre-conception. And the examples I will give are women, often very young women, who've already had a baby removed. So that's a cohort of women that pre-conception, before they conceive again, we want to give a lot more support and a lot more advice and a lot more dedicated intervention to those women. The other examples I would give cohorts who are very, very vulnerable and we would want to give a better service to. Pre-conception are women who have experienced child sexual exploitation themselves as a victim, and actually care leavers. Care leavers are a vulnerable cohort of young people across Greater Manchester who we can give an excellent service to, better than we give at the moment, around building self-esteem, life chances, employment and skills opportunities, etc., and build into that preconception health and development. So that's probably as much as I want to say, Chair, but as I said, there's a lot more detail I can give, and Jane obviously is very close to it as well and has been a great support in progressing the work.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Is there any more contributions? Yes.
do apologise for my slight lateness. I was actually at a meeting in Bury talking about the integration of health and social care, and this was on the agenda, and it's a topic that's very close to my heart, because when I became the leader of Bury Council last year, one of the first things I did was set up a Life Chances Commission, and the focus was very much around early years and early intervention, because that's where you can make the biggest difference. And I think this has been outlined. Early years and school readiness is a key mayoral priority, and I think the mayor has set a very ambitious target where he wants Greater Manchester's level of good development at an early stage to be above the national average within 5 years. Within 5 years' time, and although we've made great progress over the last 5 years, there is still a significant amount of work to be done. I won't go over the contributions that have already been made, but just to touch on the point around looked after children. As a system, I think we spend almost £31 million a year on looked after children, which I think is a huge amount of money, but also, perhaps also indicates that we're not getting the best outcomes and not using our resources most effectively to help those younger people live fulfilling lives and making the most of the potential that they have. And as part of the whole public service reform agenda, I think it's absolutely right that the Reform Board is looking at this and looking at how, as a system, we can support looked after children in many different ways, sharing best practice from across Greater Manchester, and in the manner that Chris has described, give them the support and as much support as possible that they can achieve in life on many different areas. I think it's absolutely right that focus on looked after children is part of the whole life readiness course. But that's the only contribution I'd make, and obviously happy to take any questions.
Thank you for that. Questions in general, John?
Yeah, two questions really. I note the fact that the importance of working with our health colleagues on this project. Integrated social and healthcare in Greater Manchester, my own authority, Tameside, were one of the first to actually become integrated. I don't know, is every district in Greater Manchester now are integrated in the health and social? I wanted to know that first of all, because I think we've got to get that right first. And then the other thing is in Greater Manchester, we were very successful with the Troubled Family Scheme, and probably better than anywhere else in the UK when the government launched it. Some areas, or the government, were under criticism because they said it was a waste of money. But here it was excellent. And I'd like to know what relationship has been, what have you learnt from early intervention through the Troubled Family Scheme, and how you see that running in the future.
Just in terms of the health integration perspective, I think we're all in different places in Greater Manchester and using perhaps different models, but I think we all know we need to get to the same place. For example, and I can only really speak from Bury in terms of the detail, but we've taken a much more sort of collaborative approach in terms of sort of how we're sort of integrating. So from a commissioning approach, from April, we're going to have a one commissioning organisation, and that's a model I think most local authorities in Greater Manchester are following. And obviously, we're looking at the interrelationship between the one commissioning organisation and the local care organisation. But I know there are different approaches. I know Salford has taken a different approach in terms of vertical integration. We've taken sort of a more horizontal integration approach. So it's happening, but I think maybe at different paces, but in different ways, but it's happening, and I think that's the key point. I would say, though, in terms of school readiness, I think it's identified in the paper, it isn't just about health and social care partners as well. There are other parts of the system that have a huge role to play in this, and I want to say schools, so I know schools have a huge role to play, but I feel sorry for schools at times. We've got a huge role to play in a number of agendas, but certainly we are all moving in that same direction of travel, but I think it's tying in all the different pieces of the jigsaw, not just looking at health and social care commission or provision.
Contribution to John's question. Just on that specific question, health and social care integration, people are progressing different ways. I think what binds us together in terms of this particular agenda is our locality plans. So we've all got locality plans on a start well, live well, age well basis, and within that start well part of the plans, early years and achieving the best early years outcomes for a very young cohort is a key priority in those locality plans. So regardless of how we're doing our integration, which has certainly started at the adult end of the agenda, we're really focusing through the locality plans on this agenda here. So I'll hand over to Chris, I think.
Thank you. The learning from troubled families, as you absolutely rightly say, has been very carefully considered in this programme of work, even though it's described as early years school readiness. Actually, absolutely right, it's more than that. What we're trying to achieve here is what we call in some local authorities a team around the early years, and that's absolutely learning from the troubled families cohort, that this is around an integrated, holistic approach to family well-being and childhood. And the example that I think we would give, Jane and I, around this whole approach to, we're actually wanting to lift the cognitive development of babies and infants to the best they can possibly be on the day they start school, reception class and beyond. Just as important, we want to see a whole family that flourishes with employment and skills opportunities, good health, good diet, good well-being themselves. So it absolutely, that learning from troubled families has been threaded through, if you like, the early years school readiness programme.
Further contribution from Charles?
Sorry, just to add to that, in terms of how the rest of the troubled families money for the combined authority has now been devolved to the combined authority. So there is an opportunity to use that, using the learning from the original programme, and to shape that as we think is best for early years and early help in the system, learning from what we've already done. So again, that is an opportunity that helps this agenda.
In terms of the health and social care integration point, I would just refer you to the actual ambition at section 3, which sort of sets out sort of a checklist where by elected members, I suppose, can monitor the progress within their own localities in terms of delivery of the locality plan, in terms of the ambitions, in terms of what an early years setting should look at, having comprehensive action plans, fully integrated commissioning, information sharing, etc. So at least by 2020, at least with this aspiration, you will have at least some sort of benchmark to sort of test what's going on in your localities and towards the delivery of the locality plan.
Colin. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. I don't think anybody can underestimate the importance of this particular subject in terms of promoting the development of school readiness. But I do have to say that I wonder how we're going to achieve some of these very ambitious targets when we are seeing a situation where children's centres are being closed or merged in order to deal with staffing issues, trying to do more with less, trying to integrate with the health service, trying to integrate with a health service that's wrestling with action plans that say, can you get from inadequate to good, or can you get from requires improvement to good, and so on. Nationally, we read in the press that 1,000 placements have been lost who are able to accommodate under fives, and here we are talking about a very ambitious project that can only be achieved with a significant level in terms of increase in investment in these kind of facilities and in the staffing and training in order to ensure that these facilities are able to deliver the kind of ambitious programme that we are talking about here. So simply saying to everybody, do more with less, I'm afraid will not work. We've reached the point where we can do no more with no less, as it were. We need a significant level of investment if we are going to begin to address problems associated with disadvantage. We can only address those problems if we actually invest in those kids in those situations where young children are living, working, etc., in disadvantaged circumstances, with parents who are unemployed, non-employed, struggling to acquire the qualifications that they need in order to get into employment, etc. And the other thing that worries me about this is that there does not always appear to be an agreed definition as to what school readiness actually means. You talk to different people and you get a different definition at a slightly different age range that we might be discussing. So I think there needs to be an establishment of an agreed definition of what exactly school readiness means, which is understood and accepted by all of the various partners working within each of the 10 districts, Chair. Thank you.
So, to summarise there was a question at the end, which was, do we have a definition? Which we have asked before. So, to focus that a little bit, we have a graph here, which looks quite good, really. In Greater Manchester, we've definitely improved things over the past 5 years, relative to everywhere else. Do we have a definition as to how that graph was arrived at, and is that our benchmark? So actually, does that answer Colin's question?
The definition for school readiness that you'll see in the report, that has been used for quite some time now, is the assessment in the early years foundation stage, which is an assessment of every child in the term before their 5th birthday. So it's an assessment undertaken by a qualified teacher. I mean, there's a sort of there's a quality mark to it. It has to be a qualified teacher who undertakes that assessment, and it has quite a complex domain in terms of speech and language, physical ability, social skills. If you like, it's a list, it's a menu of expectations that one would expect to see for a little one just before their 5th birthday, and it's moderated. I think that's important to say as well. So therefore, all the children who are referred to in this report, in the graphs, have been through the same early years foundation stage assessment in the classroom by their teacher. I think if I may just make one comment, Chair, in terms of the graph and the detail in here regarding improvement, what we would want to see in each of our localities is that the individual early years foundation stage for each child and in each neighbourhood, that's very important as well, because what you don't want to do is have any masking of children who are really quite behind where they should be, if this makes sense. So to aggregate up, I'll talk about Stockport, it would look, that's great achievement, been great improvement across many of the local authority areas. It has. However, you have to drill down to a neighbourhood level, to a classroom level, to target the children who are behind at the early years foundation stage. In fact, long before that is what this model is around, so that you identify early on vulnerability. I hope that makes sense.
Chair, if I may, I think there was wrapped up in Councillor McLaren's comments, I think some very valid points around the funding of this. I think the first thing I would say is our focus has to be on what our ambition is, and then I think look how to fund it, because it's absolutely right that as Greater Manchester we should be ambitious, and certainly should be ambitious in the manner that the Mayor has set out. But it's undeniable that obviously there has to be some funding around to support this. Not just funding for the sake of it, but to help embed this change. There's issues around workforce, as you've identified, and I've just drawn members' attention to paragraph 5 around a funding requirement. We know that some additional funding will be necessary, and there will be bids going into the Health and Social Care Transformation Fund. We are still waiting, and I think it's important to make this clear, we are still waiting to hear from the Department of Education in relation to the business case, the financial case we put forward for £36 million worth of investment to support this agenda. And we're not resting on our laurels. We have actually made a submission in terms of the GMCA's position in terms of the autumn budget for us to get some accelerated funding so we can really drive this system-wide change. So you're absolutely right. you cannot divorce this agenda from additional funding. But I think it's also right to say that individual local authorities are also going to have to make, and their partners in this new integrated world are going to have to make some judgments in terms of their spending priorities around this agenda. And we have some excellent best practice in Greater Manchester, I think Stockport being one of them. So you're absolutely right to raise the issue that without some adequate funding, it's going to be challenging, but that shouldn't dull our ambition to ensure that we break down some of the barriers that exist, which aren't necessarily related to funding, which are sort of highlighted earlier on in the report.
Hang on, Stella. I've got a list. It is. No, it's Tim next actually. But I've got a list on the go. I just like to refer back to the benchmark. I'm content with that benchmark personally. Are you content that we've absolutely? If we speak to 10 people, we'll get 10 different definitions. But I'm happy that we have been delivered, that we're working on a standard definition. Are we as a committee happy that we're working on a standard definition? Got any comments on that, Colin? You asked the question, so let's start with you.
Well, I think it depends who you're talking to, Chair. I think there is a general understanding, but not necessarily an agreed definition as to what everybody understands and accepts school readiness to be. And I think it's important that we achieve that uniformity, if you like, as quickly as possible. So I think that is the first thing. I think it's going to take a little bit of time. I mean, 2020 is an ambitious timescale. 3 years, let's say we go to the 31st of December 2020. 3 years is still an ambitious timescale, because it's going to take probably the best part of 12 months to turn this around and to get everybody going in the right direction with this kind of programme, given that we're talking about not just revenue but a capital programme also in order to achieve this kind of ambition. But that's one I think that we all share, and I think it's one that all authorities and the health service are going to have to work towards, because the longer we leave it, the harder it's going to be to address these kind of problems now and in the future.
So if I can just pick up on that, you referred back to funding there, which I appreciate. Trying to bottom out. So I'm going to refer back to you, Chris. Would you like to comment on this benchmark? Because I think the key point is this benchmark, because if Colin's not prepared to accept that we have a benchmark, actually it's going to move every year and the graph means nothing. What's your feeling on the benchmark? I was quite confident with what you said, but what's your general feeling on that benchmark, please?
I can really appreciate the concern expressed, because by and large any assessment of an individual child by an individual may have a margin of human error or subjectivity. However, certainly, if I may use an example from Stockport, and apologies that I use Stockport because there's excellent practice across all 10 local authorities, but I can use Stockport as a specific example because we have undertaken a research of tracked activity of little ones with a cohort of children who didn't access the 8-stage model. And we were able to, so if you like, it's not perfect. I can't offer perfection, but what I can say is that a group of children that were of significant number compared with a group of children who hadn't been able to access the 8-stage model, there was a consistent improvement at the early years foundation stage across all the domains compared with the group of children who hadn't accessed some of the 8-stage model. So I think that's enough to satisfy that actually this measurement in that term before a child's 5th birthday is it good enough? We'll work hard to get this better. But I think for now, the work that we've done over quite a number of years, I don't know whether Jane wants to come in, because we've really worked hard precisely to address the point that's been very well made here. Do we have a very reliable and comprehensive benchmark? And I think it's as good as we have at the moment, but again, it's an area that we'd probably want to improve upon.
I think as Chris says, there is a risk of individual variation in interpretation, and for that reason, I think most of us now internally within local authorities have got moderating systems. Certainly we have in Salford. So in the same way as we moderate teacher outcomes of any internal assessments of progress for children, we also moderate early years foundation stage assessments. So internally within local authorities, and obviously as we develop as a combined authority around this, I'm sure that will get scaled up. We already moderate our outcomes, and if we think that people are interpreting the criteria differently, we've got that opportunity then to go and test that and challenge that. So I think it's not perfect, but as Chris said, it's as good as it can be, and we need to work with what we've got as far as we can.
I'm satisfied that we have a benchmark. Are we as a group satisfied? I appreciate there will be variations, and I think everybody appreciates that, but without even agreeing that, you know what, we're not going to be anywhere in a year's time, because nobody's going to believe the figures, whatever. I'm looking for your satisfaction here, Colin.
I don't think it's a case of necessarily just being satisfied. I think it's a case of looking to ensure that we're all singing from the same hymn sheet eventually, as it were. There may not be at the moment, and I'm sure that most people, if not everybody in this room, is singing from the same hymn sheet. It's what's happening outside that obviously we need to look into, and perhaps that's something that we can ask. It's a question that we can put to each of the various partners in each of the 10 districts when the task and finish group, assuming it's agreed that we appoint a task and finish group, might be able to look into.
Thank you. Tim.
Thank you, Chair. Just two questions, if that's right. The first one just relates to the table 1, which is the little table of percentages about good level of development at the end of early years foundation stage. And I just wanted to understand a little bit about why in the 5-year period from 2012 to 2017, anywhere in the country almost, so we're looking at the England figure, there's been what on the face of it feels like quite a remarkable improvement, like a 40% improvement, which is marvellous if that, because at the same time, anecdotally, services have been disappearing, there's been no money for, what I mean? So I just wanted to understand a little bit about that, if that's okay. And then the second thing was just to understand a bit more about what the difference between what the Greater Manchester and the England average is if it's easy to say this, what are the 2 top things that we're falling short on? Where are the 2 things that we really need to make a difference that set Greater Manchester aside from the England average? What are the 2 sort of aspects of school readiness that we're falling behind on?
Whoever fancies it.
I think if I start with your second question first, if I may. Certainly for Greater Manchester's children, from the work that we've been progressing over really many years now, this isn't recent, this has been at least 5-6 more years. The 2 findings I would suggest that have been quite compelling really is that the period of time, what we call that the parent-infant attachment period, particularly immediately after birth, and what the research would say the first 1,001 days. And that's pretty solid research that's tracked thousands of children. And it does show that is essential, that the relationship, the interaction, the attachment between baby and parent in that first 1,001 days is absolutely probably the most important relationship for the rest of your life. That's how solid and sound the research is, I would say. How profound actually that research is. So there's that. And also the other thing that I would say from the cohort of children across Greater Manchester for their life chances and their future fortune is the well-being of the parents. The child poverty indicators, and then therefore the prediction of good health and good well-being for the rest of your life around child poverty, again, is quite profound. The research is absolutely compelling. Did you want to come in there? like that. Okay, just to support what Chris has said, really, we're digging down into the data to understand across those 3 developmental areas where our children are, where do they underperform consistently. What the data is telling us, above and beyond the attachment and that poverty agenda, is communication and language. There's a number of children in I think 4 of our boroughs where we underperform, but we haven't got that detail to present in today's report. It's a big piece of work that we're doing in the CA at the moment to actually get back to that point that was made earlier around where do we begin to target to make that difference. The data is good, and we are kind of now in line with England and the North West. The gap is for our children who are eligible for free school meals. So again, that whole poverty agenda and the experiences and the difficulties that those families face is that whole family approach that we need to start to get into. The point around, actually, if we look at the trend over the past 5 years, everybody's doing well. Again, we're trying to understand what's different in GM beyond our 8-stage delivery model. I think nationally the measure was changed at the beginning of that period, so we did all start to then measure against that EYFS, so we've got consistency across England, not just in GM. There's been an increase in health visitors. So again, that universal offer, what they're doing at the front line with families. We've done a real deep dive again in terms of what works in Greater Manchester, both in terms of how we assess children and then what we do to respond to that developmental delay if there is one. And then the final thing is national policy. Actually, it's been high on the agenda for a number of years nationally, and there's been a lot of review of what works. And again, in GM, we've been implementing that.
One of the big factor that I think has been significant is Ofsted hold us to account for it. So I sit in front of Ofsted twice a year and account for our early years progress in Salford in detail, not just the overall measure, but actually within the measure, which areas they're progressing well and which areas we're not. And so I think that's really focused everybody's minds, and nationally that's the case. So it's meant that really we are being held to account very robustly through the inspection process. So as well as all those policy issues and recognising why it really matters, the accountability, because it really matters, has significantly been increased in the last few years, and I think that's focused all of our mind and resources very effectively in terms of making progress. But I think we've done probably the easier bit so far, and actually to make that next stage of progress, it is that effective targeting of those groups that we haven't yet reached and the depth of understanding of where we haven't yet got success, and that's the big next challenge for us.
I actually went to the conference that he had on child readiness, and Jonathan Rouse said it was going to be very, very challenging to improve things because all the current, in a way, nationally is going against us. And in Stockport, the last conversation I heard from the head of children's services there, the councillor who's the head of the past portfolio, he was saying that children's services have been more or less decimated in Stockport over the last few years. And he's very concerned, naturally, about that. But also, if you look at the Shore Start centres, we used to have 19, we've now got 2, and 2 that are sort of nearly there, but not quite. So, there are a lot of pressures against it. What I was going to ask you as a question, though, is from the conference, there was a lot of enthusiasm, but I didn't actually see the different things that were going to happen that possibly aren't happening in good places now. A lot of talk about integration of services and health services with the education services and so on, but I'm not quite sure what the mechanism is actually going to be for that and how it would apply in my own borough. is somebody going to be detailed to be a key worker from birth for children, and are they going to have the power to, if you like, commission services from other agencies? Because we've got a team around the child in many cases already, haven't we? So how is it going to be totally different or much better?
Well, the ambition that we have for this particular programme of work across Greater Manchester is that we absolutely now scale across all 10 local authority areas excellent practice, because we pretty much know now what excellent practice in the early years looks like, and we know from research what will have an impact on infants in terms of improving their whole situation, speech and language, physical development, social and emotional development at the age of 5. We know what that looks like now. So the programme of activity that underpins this report is to scale up that excellent practice right across the 10 local authority areas. And as I think I said right from the outset, this will require some detailed planning that's already been progressed well. We can do more, but some very detailed planning with health colleagues, because the role of midwifery, the role of health visiting, the role of early years workers, and the role of, if you like, parental support are key strands to targeting the most vulnerable. So what the 8-stage model does, it allows for the identification as soon as possible, as early as possible, of vulnerability. So that having identified vulnerability, having identified a challenge for a family, particularly pre-birth, then that will trigger a team around the early years to start to work with a family in order to put into place the interventions that we know have a strong evidence base that will allow us to arrest deterioration. So I don't know whether that's enough detail, but in terms of the role of schools, as the paper hopefully helpfully indicates, there'll be time now for us to say what is the role of reception class, what is the role of schools in terms of being a system leader, much more so than we've seen before.
If I may, Chair, just add very briefly. I mean, we are already on. We're at year 5 of a 5-year journey, so it's not as if we are reinventing the wheel in terms of the early years model that was implemented previously. That's not to say, though, we get it right and we're in a perfect situation at the moment. There are many barriers that have been identified in the paper that's gone to the Scrutiny Committee around a lack of an integrated workforce, or around a lack of data sharing, about not commissioning to the most effective extent. Changing that culture and environment and helping scaling those things up across Greater Manchester, where it is patchy in terms of quality and performance, those things I think will help drive the performance that we're talking about. So yeah, we already are in a decent place, and you've heard the reasons why in terms of the progression over the last few years, because it has been remarkable in some places. I think it's taking it to the next stage and embedding those further improvements to make the system already better. So it's not starting with a blank piece of paper. I think we're in a good place already, but it's getting those improvements which will take performance above the national average, which is where we should be.
Some of the things I was going to say have already been, I think, mulled over in earlier contributions, but I take it from what we've said that the lead indicator on this is the development, early years development in Table 1. And then it does go on to say about related health and wellbeing indicators, which are in the graphic on the next page. So are these indicators something that feed into the overall assessment, and are there other indicators as well that go into the percentages at Table 1? The other thing is, how far down can we drill on the figures? Is this go down to school level? And presumably the school is the basic unit, so it go down to school level, and that's part of the data that the schools will have. The other thing, though, is mentioned before about excuse me, about the what figure we do use. This, of course, is at the end of early years, and is that just the most practical way of doing it for the data? Because obviously the problems are there, where there are problems 2 years earlier. As I said last month, my daughter's a year 1 teacher in a highly socially deprived area of Salford. It's St Paul's Cross Lane, Charlotte, and you'll know what that implies. And there, 2 years earlier, it's children who barely have language, who barely are able to care and toilet for themselves as they enter the school. I mean, is this just the best way, as it were, the most practical way of picking up that data to identify the problems which may well have been there 2 years earlier and then address them that way?
In terms of the 8-stage model, that has built into it assessments long before the 8th stage. The 8th stage is the early years foundation stage assessment, but very importantly, there's a tool that's applied called the Ages and Stages questionnaire. That's just one tool that's, again, got a solid evidence base. That assessment is undertaken right from within the first 2 weeks, 10 to 14 days of babies being born. And then the sequencing of those assessments is prescribed throughout the 8-stage model. So if you like, that's what the 8-stage model is. It's a much more thorough, systematic assessment and identification right throughout the first 5 years of a child's life. If I've understood your first question correctly, Councillor, forgive me if I haven't, and you can ask it again, the early years foundation stage assessment has a whole list, a whole menu of different elements of a child's situation and well-being and performance, for want of a better word, that it looks at. So it isn't just one-dimensional, if you like. It's a very thorough, comprehensive assessment of how a child is functioning at the age of 5.
Just come back. That's for the individual child. I mean, the things that are on the graphic are broad indicators across a community. So there are different things which are looked at for the individual child at that assessment stage. Yeah.
And in terms of the question that you asked around, can we present that at classroom level? Absolutely we can. And that's the important thing that we have to do, so that where children are doing very well at the early years foundation stage, that data doesn't mask the children who really need support and intense family support, if that makes sense.
I just to add, I guess, that second page with all those other factors on it, those are all factors that are in similar trends and kind of create similar risk patterns. So we tend to look at them as a group and say, how does this relate to that? What's the impact of this on that, in order to understand? Because getting that accurate assessment and information, yes, presenting the early years foundation stage outcome is the top of that bit, but actually we use all the information at the different stages, not just to inform the progress, but actually what we need to do about the progress. So we can have all the assessment in the world, but if we don't then intervene in response to what we find, then we might as well not do the assessment. So we assess all the way through, and then we say at each of those stages, actually what is that additional bit of support that's needed that will improve the outcome at the next level. So it's that critical join up, and those factors that are on that second page, some of those are real contributory factors that impact on that progress through.
I think this is the last. Stella.
Sorry, the graph on page 2 shows it going up very encouragingly, but it's levelling off. And there are still a quarter of the children, more than 25%, who aren't school ready, even in the best authorities. Now, some of them, I realise, will have special circumstances. They may have learning difficulties, they may have all kinds of things. But there are still people who are, generally speaking, perhaps euphemistically called hard to reach. And it's very... it seems very sensible to to target a lot of our effort and a lot of the resources onto those people. But it's going to take, isn't it, a great deal of integration with the health service, thinking of, when you're talking about your 8-stage assessments, already, and I think pretty universally, the health service assesses children, babies, and the physical stages that they go through at 6 months, at 12 months, and 2 years, and so on. And if they're now going to be assessed at similar ages or on a different occasion, there are some groups that are going to find that very hard to engage with, because they'll have to go to a clinic for one thing and then have to go to another different clinic for something else. And some of them won't feel able to do that for a whole variety of reasons, and these may be in these hard-to-reach groups. So it's going to be the integration on trying to do both types of assessments, either on the same occasion or very close together, that's going to be a problem, isn't it? I realise that's a very detailed practical thing. But also, one of the criticisms of Sure Start was that it didn't reach some of the hard-to-reach groups. I thought that was a very unjust criticism, because didn't really have long enough to be able to tell how well they'd reached the hard-to-reach groups. But that's what's going to be that's what's going to be looked at in the end, isn't it? You've spent all this money, and there still might be 10% of children that aren't responding, and so and part of that may be a stigma. You know, I'm not going to go to that clinic because it's only for the people who aren't doing very well. And that was the beauty, one of the beauties of Sure Start, was that it was universal, and people could go along and ask for help and get help before birth and after birth and all the rest, without looking as though they were poor or in need or disadvantaged. So, the other very small question I've got, really, and it's also to do with integration with the health, is you mentioned some of the cohorts of women who might need support before conception, or certainly before birth. And there's groups that, and I think the health service does a lot, or tries to do a lot, to help people who've had repeated miscarriages. But I think you have to have 3 before you get any help from the health service. And that's another vulnerable group, isn't it? Thank you, Chair.
Would you like to respond to any of those?
There certainly isn't any intention to duplicate assessments. The 8-stage model fits entirely with what you may recognise used to be called the Healthy Child Programme, which has been rolled out across health visitors across Greater Manchester for quite some time. So I don't think there needs to be concern, if you like, that this will be duplication, and that it will, if you like, expect families to unnecessarily turn up to lots of different appointments. That absolutely won't be the case.
Any more brief questions? Propose to bring that to a close. Could I ask? It does concern me, this benchmarking. I actually accept that you have a reasonable benchmark, and we did get distributed at the last meeting, potentially last meeting, one of the last meeting or the one before, the benchmark and what the definition was. Would it be too much of an ask for a very abridged, very clear, in very plain English, what, we expect the child to know 6 colours by the time they're 5. We expect them to be able to walk along a beam for 3 metres. I don't want to drill down into the minute detail, but it might help if there was a 20-point thing that we could card that we just give to everybody and say, right, well, that is really what we're looking for. I'm sure it may even exist, for all I know, but really abridge it down to bullet points so that we can understand it. Total lay people, that would be very helpful. If you could perhaps feed that into the committee, that would be great. Thank you.
Very happy to do that, Chair. Provide that before the next meeting.
So I think that finishes with the officers and with Rishi, but I would like to stay on this, and I think it's such a deep topic, we do need a sort of subcommittee. So I would ask, would anybody like to be on a subcommittee? I don't know, 4 people, 5 people, because I don't want to be thrashing out this definition again, and don't want to have to thrash out every single item at every single committee meeting we have. I'd like to get a report to say, you know what, we can trust these 4 or 5 people to come up with a reason. Do we have any volunteers? Don't rush. I'm going to carry that over, but I'm conscious that we're going to get, before we, we're going to be into January, we've got budget to carry through and all that sort of stuff. We're going to get we need to pull this together rapidly. I appreciate what you're saying. We've got a combined committee meeting tomorrow of all the chairs to see if that appeals to everybody, and if it does, we'll go down that route. But I would ask you to be conscious to step forward for this, otherwise we're just going to get stuck in the mud and not get anywhere. So I'll accept what you say and just carry that over now till tomorrow, but really by the time we get to December, I think we need to be getting some volunteers. Okay, I'll note that there, thank you. So moving on, next stage I think really, which is, where's it gone? There. Report to consider readiness. It's not quite the next step, but nearly the next step, public sector apprenticeships approach. So we've got a report from Gemma. Over to you.
Sorry, Chair. Are we approving the recommendations at the end of this first report before we move on? Okay,
so we'll just, for the moment, receive it. It is what it is, and we're not at a point where we can take any great decisions. Are we happy? Are we content? Great. Gemma.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to talk through the GM apprenticeship programme. And as the Chair has rightly pointed out, I think this is a really good link in terms of what we can do to link employment and skills within the first agenda item, but also around the kind of life readiness agenda of those young people once they've kind of got into their school life, what happens to them and what role can the public sector play. So you'll see from the report, what we've been doing over the last 12 months is the government announced an apprenticeship levy for businesses with a pay bill over 3 million. And what this was, some businesses saw that as a tax, but actually what this was doing is around investment in skills and actually around apprenticeships and trying to increase apprenticeship take-up across the country. So you'll have seen from the government's policy around 3 million starts on apprenticeships. So we took this one step further within Greater Manchester, as you would imagine. Across the public sector, our apprenticeship bill is around £22 million per year. From the value across transport, from police, from fire, and from the local authorities and the combined authorities. And actually what we wanted to try and do here is to really add value into the system, really create a workforce for the future, but also ensure that quality was running throughout. And needless to say, if you don't spend your levy, you lose your levy. So there was an element of that around, there's £22 million that we can invest really in workforce skills around new apprenticeships and upskilling our current workforce across the public sector. So what do we do and how do we do that? So what the paper does is it takes you through the elements that we've started to develop, and it is early days because it's a really kind of complicated system. But what we wanted to try and do was to start looking at those 4 themes around workforce planning, consistent and coordinated approach, high quality, and then integrating with wider public service reform. So if I just take each of those just really briefly and just give you a brief update, and then I really look forward to the discussion and the comments. So workforce planning, what we wanted to try and do is to start to think about the workforce of the future. Actually, where have we got some gaps and some problems? And linked really, really closely with the school readiness agenda. You know, as we've said, resources are tight. So how do we ensure that within that 8-stage model we've got healthcare professionals that understand what it means around giving those children the life readiness skills? How do we make sure that it links in with the nursery places? So there are free nursery places for children from 2 and 3. Have we got the capacity within the system to be able to do that? So can we target something? So it runs all the way through within our workforce. But also, how do we provide placements and how do we provide apprenticeships for those young people and adults that have been out of work, but also just the opportunity to work within the public sector of Greater Manchester. But in order to do this, we need to start thinking about where the gaps are and what is our talent pipeline, and where can we perhaps target some of our apprenticeship levy on those hard to fill vacancies, or those vacancies whereby we have a lot of volume, or whereby we potentially struggle, so social care, health, all of that kind of comes into that workforce planning. Consistent and coordinated approach is the next one. And actually, again, this is about the value that the public sector brings, and how do we get the quality in terms of employment and employment practices. So how do we get a kind of standard approach across the public sector? So what does it look and feel like to be an apprentice across our public sector? And how do you move between, and how do you get really, really good experience across our public sectors? Apprenticeship wage will always come into this. There are variances across business, across the public sector. But actually what we strive to do within the public sector is to at least work towards the national minimum wage for age as a starting point, I think is fair to say. And also things like standard contracts, standard hours, what does that look like? What does it look and feel like? Because there are variances. So we're doing a huge amount of work with HR and HR directors around that. Quality then, absolutely. This is something that comes up time and time again. The levy puts the employer, and the employer here being the public sector, in the driving seat to actually say, no, I don't want that. What I want for my business is this. And what we can start to do is start to challenge and to develop new apprenticeship standards. But quality has to come into that. It has to be a quality apprenticeship. So actually what we're doing is developing that within our providers and our independent training providers, and working with our colleges to say, what's the bells and whistles that we want? What's the social value that we want in Greater Manchester from our providers? So it's not just an apprenticeship, it's an apprenticeship plus, and we can actually drive that within the levy system. And then integrating with the public, wider public service reform. So can we take this model and work with the Job Centre Plus? Can we take it and work with our colleges so that we are getting quality apprenticeships, really good high volume, and also fulfilling the gap within Greater Manchester in terms of the skills needs? Because that's another thing that this allows us to do, is that we know where the gaps are in terms of growth and productivity. How do we work with our businesses to make sure that they're filled? And we can do that by starting within the public sector. So I'll just go on briefly just to achievements today. We have got a memorandum of understanding which is in the annex, and that has been agreed to be worked towards by wider leadership team, by health colleagues, by transport, by fire, which is really, really great, because what this does is a standard approach towards apprenticeships across Greater Manchester public sector. We also completed some vacancy analysis. So what are the jobs that are coming up time and time again whereby we can potentially look for an apprentice? So whether that's in work or whether that's a new entrant, whether that's a young person, whether that's an adult, we can link this in terms of public service reform all the way through. And actually what we're trying to do is develop flagship programmes. So how do we ensure that we are driving this and we are absolutely delivering what Greater Manchester needs with our apprenticeship levy? And I think one other thing, going back to the point that Councillor Shorey made, was around looked after children in the school readiness and in life readiness. Actually, we could target some of our apprenticeship levy to be able to support that. So we're also looking at that in terms of the different cohorts that we as the public sector are corporate parents for. How do we ensure that we are giving them a job and giving them that opportunity at the end? So I'll stop there. Like I say, there's a lot within the paper, but I really kind of welcome questions. It is early days, but I think the approach is, how do we get value, how do we get quality, and how do we get a flexible workforce, and how do we really support our young people and our adults across Greater Manchester?
Start with Tim.
Two questions. First one is, from out of £22 million, assuming national minimum wage for age, how many apprentices does that buy us in Greater Manchester in the public sector a year? And from that figure, how short from that are we now? And are there any particular parts of the public sector that are not stepping up to the plate, I suppose? And then the second question is for me, one of the measures of success of an apprenticeship scheme, sorry, be careful then, don't we, is whether or not the young people involved say go on to permanent employment, and whether or not we've started doing any measuring of that, or if there are, because perhaps it's too early days, I don't know, whether or not there are plans to do measuring of that and how we might do that going forwards.
So in terms of the 22 million, the levy is only allowed to pay for the training. So actually the salary is covered elsewhere. There are different rates and values and levels. So you could take a smaller number of kind of higher level apprentices and therefore get less, or you could mix and match it. So we've done the analysis, which I can share with this group, around how many that would look like, varying on a different range. So in terms of the shortfall, yeah, absolutely. What the levy has done nationally, not just within the public sector, it's seen a massive dip within apprenticeship starts. We're across Greater Manchester, across national, we're probably about 50% down this point last year from where we are. And what that's actually done is people are nervous about the levy. It's quite a complicated system as well. So on the other side, what we're trying to do within the Employment and Skills team is to work with those businesses, to work with the government, to make sure that businesses understand the levy, understand those people that don't pay the levy, particularly the SMEs. Let's try and denoise it for them and actually make it a kind of seamless approach so that we can get the value. But yeah, for us, we will absolutely need to start spending our levy in the next kind of, probably after Christmas, to make sure that it's not lost. But it does survive for 2 years, so you don't have to spend it within the month. It's there for 2 years, and then you start to lose it, but you do accrue over those times. So we've got the figures, which, like I say, I can share. In terms of success measures, you're absolutely right. And this is something that we've been working on prior to the levy coming in, because actually the government's response around 3 million starts isn't a good enough measure for Greater Manchester. Actually, it should be about completions, and it should be about progression, and it should be about sustainability. And that runs through with all of our programmes around employment and skills. So yeah, we absolutely measure that. Part of the consistent approach is, you know, how do we ensure that we guarantee interviews for our apprentices? How are they not seen as just an apprentice? It is about a job. It is about a training. They are adding value within your organisation. So there are some of the things that we've been measuring. And then in terms of the providers, that's also the kind of the additional social value. So what else can that provider do to ensure that that wraparound support, particularly for the vulnerable, but for everybody, how do you ensure that they are job ready at the end and that they have reached their full potential?
Just to understand the first question again, is in the public sector in Greater Manchester at the moment, are there 100 apprentices? Are there 1,000? I can't visualise the scale of how many public sector apprentices we have now. I can see the picture at Bury Council. I can see there was 30 there or something like that, but I don't know how that extrapolates up.
It does vary, and I will get the exact figure. So across, you know, for some local authorities within each department, they may have 2, they may have 100. So I've got absolute figures that I can share with this group. We do need probably another 40,000 more if we are ever going to reach our potential. But again, that varies between new entrants into and actually those people that are currently in the workforce. So again, what the levy allows you to do is upskill, because sometimes I think we lose that with apprentices, is that they're always viewed as the young person. So this is a real opportunity around leadership and management, progression, sustainment. How do you increase your productivity as well within your business? So like I say, it varies across, but I'll get you the absolute figure.
So, I've got two more questions. Just on that, you said we would like another 30 or 40,000 more within GM, within the public sector, within GM.
So if we were to, so what we have done in terms of the figures, what we've done is we've built up the 3 million starts that the government has said. What's the proportion within Greater Manchester? And that is between the kind of 30 and 40,000, and then within that, if we are to meet our levy target within the public sector, there will be an enormous jump up in terms of what we need to do to be able to spend our levy. But again, I can't give you a figure because it varies as to whether you take a higher level apprentice, whether you take a 16-year-old or a 20-year-old. But again, we can do that modelling and share it for this group.
I know a little bit about this, and a level 4 apprentice was going to cost me £18,000 for 18 months. Basically, we got some grant, and we had to make some contribution to it. So 22 million only represents about 1,200 people at that sort of level. What's the average? And is that 20? So several questions from me, and I do apologise to the committee. So is it 22 million a year, or is it over a period of time that has not been disclosed to us? And what is the average cost of an apprentice at any level? I.e., because on the whole they're going to be spread across the whole spectrum, probably fewer at the higher level and more at the lower level. So do we have an average cost and a £22 million question?
Yep, so it's £22 million a year based across our public sector. And the average cost, it would be in the region of between 5,000 and 6,000, I would say, because some of your lower level ones at this moment in time are not your £18,000. So again, we've modelled that in previous kind of papers for our leadership team. So again, we can share that, because what you can start to see then is how many young people we would need to take on, or how many people within your workforce, or at what levels, and what does that look like, and what is the cost of that. So again, we don't want to make sure, because I think there have been skills programmes in the past whereby people have just perhaps not used it as well as they should have done, whereas what we want to ensure here is it's meeting the needs of, one, the business, but also Greater Manchester.
John.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. In an earlier life, I was heavily involved in management consultancy and training, in particularly in Greater Manchester, and I was astonished as to the variables there is with different training providers and the quality of training that was being provided. It absolutely shocked me to the core at the time. I did training courses in here, in fact, in this very same building, and I've got to say the Chamber of Commerce were fantastic in their training when I don't know whether they're still here now. But because of that, because of my experience, I think this is fantastic and great to see the combined authority take the cudgels on this. Absolutely fantastic, because it really is needed in the public sector, and we need succession planning, proper succession planning, and it's to give the youngsters a real chance to make a career. So the emphasis, and you made this, on the quality of the training. I would like to know what guarantees can you give me, who is going to ensure that the progress of each individual apprentice is given that quality training individually, and that the standard of training and performance by those training providers is being adhered to. It is absolutely, how is it going to be measured? It's absolutely fundamental to the success of this, and I particularly want it to be a success. Thank you.
No, you're absolutely right, and thank you for those comments. Quality came out throughout when we started this piece of work, actually. So what we have actually, and we're in this at this moment in time. So what you'll get is providers will have to be part of the Education and Skills Foundation's training kind of framework, and everybody goes onto that, and they'll get quality checked by the agency. What we have done in Greater Manchester for this piece of work is we've added on another level. So actually what we've made is that providers, and like I say, we're just in this procurement round now, we've made them bid into a Greater Manchester framework. And what that has been built around is the social value policy, but also what we expect to be the added value within that. So the measurement, the sustainability, the guaranteed interviews, the English and maths, everything else that we would expect to see, that's been written in. So what we are going through at this moment in time is that procurement round. So we've had providers bid into that, and we're just appraising that and moderating that at this moment in time to say, you know, in terms of quality, you've not made the mark there. So therefore, this is what we expect from a combined authority and a public sector you need to be able to do to step up, to be able to deliver against the public sector. So that's absolutely where we've been coming from. In terms of the measurement and the monitoring, that will again be done by that. It'll be written into contracts, and we will performance management them. So.
Yvonne and Colin. I think it was Colin. And then
in the past, I think apprenticeships have largely been about jobs for the boys, haven't they? So are you going to make gender a fairly important issue in this new scheme? And I noticed one or two things in the report which looked hopeful. It mentions job swaps at one point, and I wondered if there was any chance of, that meant there would be chances for people to have taster sessions of different kinds of jobs. Because when I look at the list of the public sector areas, I could just see which ones most girls would go for. And if I had £1, because I used to do quite a lot of careers advice in schools, if I had £1 for every girl who wanted to be a beautician or a hairdresser or a nursery nurse, I'd be a millionaire. And somehow or other we've got to break this, haven't we? And I know that, for example, engineering and maybe things to do with railways, if that was mentioned in the report, are probably anathema to a lot of girls. But are you going to work quite hard at breaking down these psychological barriers? And it's not just the psychological barriers. I think it's also been that male-only environments have been very unfriendly places for lone females to venture into. And that is to do with training employers as well, isn't it? Making sure that they create the right atmosphere and everything else. And just one other quick thing, I think from what I've seen of apprentices so far in Stockport in our borough, they seem to be very isolated, like one person in a department or in a school or something. I'm not sure that is always very good for breaking into new areas if it's there's just one of you. So maybe critical mass is something to think about as well if you want to get girls into new places. And I was going to ask what your target groups really were when you talk about the talent pipeline, whatever the phrase was. In the past, when we had Ferranti attached to our school that I was in, I'm afraid they're dead and buried now, but they had a good apprentice scheme, but they actually said they weren't targeting the people who got 5 or more good GCSEs. They were probably targeting the people just below that. And I just wondered if you had some view of, the kind of kids you'd be looking for.
No, thanks very much for that. And I think this fits in within the wider work and skills agenda for the Greater Manchester Combined Authority and the work that we've been doing over the last few years. In terms of careers advice and actually breaking down those barriers in terms of gender and other disadvantaged groups, you're absolutely right. The work that we do as a combined authority with our local authorities and our partners and our businesses, we have to tell those young people what the jobs are. We have to get them excited about how great Greater Manchester is, and we have to kind of break down the barriers of social mobility so that actually people do know that they can succeed and they can get a job. And that's where the gender balance comes in. So absolutely, you're absolutely right. What we've been doing is working with our schools and our colleges and our parents to make sure that it isn't that stereotype. So there are apprenticeships for everybody in every sector, but you also need to work that back. So you can't just do it at kind of 16 when they're thinking about where they're going to go. How do you work back into the schools? But also, how do you break down that stereotype with the employers? So we're doing a huge amount of work with careers and employers around, we had, what does somebody that works on the railways look like? Well, they look like this, and there is that stereotype within young people. Well, actually, we took a female engineer, and everyone was kind of blown away by that, and that's where you start to make that change. So yeah, we were absolutely working very, very hard to make sure that apprenticeships are seen as parity of esteem for one, because I think there has been that over the last few years in terms of if you get your A to C, you will tend to take an academic route. Well, actually, apprenticeships are there for everybody. They are a high-quality route. Technical education is high on the government's agenda, and we need to make sure that the quality is coming through. But that has to start with people need to understand the choices that they've got. and they need to understand where they can succeed and where they can get to, be it female, be it BME, be it, you know, somebody that has got their GCSE English and Maths. It's our responsibility as the public sector and also the partners that sit within us that we are breaking down those barriers. So I think you're absolutely right to challenge that. We do monitor that in terms of the CA, in terms of the gender balance of our starts across apprenticeships and other disadvantaged groups. I think the job swaps is great. It's a brilliant idea, and that's one of the things that we wanted to do, is to say, you know, if you start at a council, how do you get some experience of the fire or, you know, or health, so that you've kind of got more of a bag of tricks in you, so that when you do come out into the big wide world, you have got that experience. Because what we do know is that work experience and encounters with business make you more likely to be able to succeed. You are less likely to be neat, you know, not in education, employment or training. So what we're trying to do is ensure that apprenticeships doesn't just sit on its own, it sits within a wider strategy, so that we can make sure that everybody is succeeding. I think in terms of the target groups, what we talk about there are target groups in terms of disadvantaged groups, and again, I don't really like to label young people, but we do have programmes that, you know, looked after children, carers, those young people from a BME community, but also we have target groups in terms of sectors, and that again is where, how do you ensure you get that critical mass? You have to work with the employers, but you also then have to work back into the schools so people know what's coming, and you start to workforce plan for the future. So we know that HS2 is coming, but we also know what jobs, what does that look like? That isn't just about laying track, it's about digital, it's about all of these great things that you can get involved in as a young person, or somebody re-entering the labour market, or that has been out of work for some time. But that's our responsibility to make sure that we start connecting the dots in terms of business, providers, schools, parents, so that we can start to make that change.
Just picking up, if I may, on that. I don't know how far Andy Burnham is on with this, but in Birmingham, they put a college together and linked it with a factory creating electric cars, etc., and battery technology. So they've targeted that and they've had a massive investment in the college, etc. Are we anywhere near that? And I do appreciate the HS2 comment. HS2 is coming. The tram is being built as we speak, and okay, we've got Trafford Park, nothing else has been agreed, but we all know in due course there'll be a circular. It might be 10 years, it might be 20 years. Have we got anything in place specifically where we can say, because I see nothing from Andy about building that. It's great about readiness, but I don't actually see anything about business and building a business thing, and this is perhaps where it best sits.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, this has been the work of the skills and employment team for a few years now, is that in terms of we know where the jobs are coming, we know what level they're going to be. So we've had to start a different conversation with employers to understand what the jobs are, so that we can work back in terms of the provision and the providers. It doesn't have to be a new institution, but what we do absolutely need to do is we need to make sure that the provision that is being put on from our colleges and our providers is linked to the growth of Greater Manchester. So we have technical pathways that are coming down the line in 2019-20. We are already working with our colleges around that. We have an Institute of Technology, which is a new concept from government, which we will formally have to bid into as Greater Manchester. But again, that looks at industrial digitisation. And what that is we've worked really hard with a lot of businesses across Greater Manchester, both large and small, to say, where are your gaps? And actually, if we were going to be kind of world class in something, what would it be? And how do we make sure that we have the provision to be able to deliver that? So industrial digitisation is around, the digital bit around HS2, the digital bit around textiles, the digital about health. How do you link all of that together? So, that's absolutely one thing that Andy is absolutely on with. But again, it's more around the work that we have been doing to lay the foundations to make sure that the provision is there. And that's some of the things where the quality comes in, because we can start to drive that and we can start to change that as long as we know what's coming.
Thank you, Chair. This sounds like a continuation, a follow-on from the Employment and Skills Task and Finish group that we developed in 12 months or so ago, and it's addressing some of the same issues that we considered at that particular time. But we took as a focus the construction industry across GM Greater Manchester, looking at ways in which we could try and identify problems, issues, gaps, and some of the problems, issues, gaps that we encountered were, for example, included access to appropriate courses at FE and HE level, the ability to travel to those courses, whether TFGM were looking at any concessionary fares, this kind of thing. We also talked about upskilling and work readiness, and what we discovered, we've talked about school readiness, we're now talking about work readiness as it were, and what became apparent through that task and finish group was that there was a huge difference of opinion, shall we say, as to how they defined work readiness, but many of the employers were running their own induction program, you might call it, in order to prepare potential employees, potential apprentices for the world of work. So I wonder what progress we're making in those sort of areas, as it were. We're also faced with the situation where colleges are having to consider merging, etc., and therefore the provision of courses, again, we're back to funding, may not necessarily match. The course provision may not necessarily match the range of apprentices that are looking for placements, etc., or the range of skills that employers are looking to identify. So I think there's still a good number of issues that we need to address, so I'd be interested to see what progress we might be making towards fulfilling some of those.
Thank you, Councillor. You're absolutely right. So there was a piece of work done which I was part of, and absolutely a lot of those issues have been kind of taken forward when we refreshed the work and skills strategy. I think access is absolutely one, so you'll see that we've already worked with Transport for Greater Manchester on an apprenticeship offer, which came out of our apprenticeship hub programme, and what that is starting to do is Andy obviously has an ambition around Transport for All in terms of the young people offer, and we're working with them on that. We're just evaluating the apprenticeship offer because we know it's a barrier. We know it's a barrier in terms of getting from A to B, but we're also starting a piece of work with Transport for Greater Manchester around it might not be the cost of it, it actually might be the time that it takes, and what does that look like. But what we do know is that apprentices do travel further than, you know, what we find in terms of travel to learn is that if you're studying the kind of level 2, level 3, which is your GCSE and your A level, you tend to stay in borough, is what the evidence suggests. Within apprentices, they do tend to travel slightly further. So again, we're just mapping that within Transport for Greater Manchester. In terms of work readiness and the world of work, you're absolutely right, and that's the next element within the Reform Board. So they talked about school readiness, and where the next element is around life readiness. So how do you bring in what employers are saying around skills, what the future kind of holds for those young people, what is the, you know, what are those softer skills that you can't get from a GCSE or a qualification. So we've done a huge amount of work with North West Business Leadership Team actually, and with the Chamber and with the Growth Hub around what a business is saying. They're saying I can't find the skills, but is that what they mean? And actually what it is they need somebody that knows that they have to turn up on time. They need to know how to work as a team. They need all of those softer skills that kind of came out through the work that we're talking about here. But how do you embed that? How do you buy that? How do you provide that is obviously something for the system to pick up. So you'll hear the Mayor talk about a curriculum for life. So we're working with the school readiness through to kind of life readiness at secondary schools and colleges to say how do you embed that curriculum for life so that young people, all young people, have the opportunity and that actually do reach their full potential. And sometimes that's not a GCSE. Sometimes some young people are never going to get that. But we can't tell them that they've failed because actually that's not setting them up for their life journey. So what we have to do is give them the help and the support to be able to kind of enter and sustain in the workplace or into higher level learning. So what we are working on is how do you bring in the employers? So construction is a brilliant example. You know, what are the skills that construction need that we can provide? But actually, what else are construction employers looking for in that space? But also the wider employers. So what we have done is we are starting now, and it will be launched in the next few weeks, Bridge GM. And what this is a platform to kind of take the noise out of the system, because what we found was it's very difficult, isn't it? I mean, a lot of it came back with, I can't get into a school, it's very hard, or a school saying, I can't engage with a business, it's really difficult. But actually what you know is if you do get an encounter with a business, you are less likely to be neat. So that's got to be something we've got to be able to sort. So we've created a platform that matches that. We've got the foundations within my team to be able to facilitate that conversation. So there are 5 ways that a business can get involved. It might be mentoring, it might be an inspirational talk, it might be work placements and work experience, it might be writing a curriculum, it might be going in and doing something really kind of empowering for those young people. And that is going to help start getting that work readiness all the way through the curriculum without having to rip the curriculum up as such. And then your final point around mergers and colleges. So what we are doing, and we work really closely with our colleges and our training providers across Greater Manchester, and what we also do is we do a huge amount of analysis, and we share the information that business is saying and share the information from anything from our deep dive research. So where are the jobs, what is the level, what is coming, how do you then bring that back? So that if there are mergers or if there are curriculum changes, they're not just done in one area and then it has a catastrophic effect across. So what we do is work with them to say, right, well, you know, we've got skills capital, which we've just going through a procurement, and that's £70 million worth of skills capital funding for colleges. And actually that is linked to the Greater Manchester Strategy. It's also linked to their place, but it's also linked to the economy of Greater Manchester. So we don't take a kind of ad hoc approach. We do look at it kind of looking down, and then you have to overlay the transport element. So if you can't get your level 4 skills within area, how far away? Because actually not everybody can do everything in terms of colleges. There's not enough money in the system. So we have to make sure that we're making the best use of our resources, both in terms of provision but also access.
Okay, I've got 2 more questions. I'm going to take Leanne's, then David's, and then if you address both of them at the same time, because we're getting a bit tight on time.
Okay, I'll keep it brief then. Thanks, Gemma. I've been involved in working with apprentices for probably about 14 years, so I really do see the value of it. I think it's great. When I think I started the first apprenticeship back 14 years ago, it was a 3-year agreement, and that gave us a lot of time to really work with the apprentice, to support the apprentice. And it also gave the apprentice time to think about what direction they wanted to go in. The last apprentice I worked with, it was a 12-month contract, and we felt that you kind of 3 or 4 months in only just getting to grips with bedding in and learning the basics before you're starting to think about this person's leaving. And I don't know whether that's unique to Manchester, because this was through the Manchester City Council apprenticeship scheme, whether that happens across all the boroughs. But that was a concern, and I'm just wondering what the plans are for the length of apprenticeships, because when you think 14 years ago we were offering 3-year apprenticeships within the public sector, and now we're potentially offering 12-month apprenticeships or 6-month internships for the more qualified. And I just wondered if you could just answer some questions around the plans for the length of period for that.
David's question first, and then you could take both questions. Did you have indicated, David? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. There's a couple of places in the document where you talk about working closely with JCP. It says to recognise and promote apprenticeships. Is it just that? What is the potential involvement of JCP? I say to somebody who worked for them for 35 years in its current and earlier iterations, and it's a big bureaucratic, top-down, London-directed organisation with a lot of inflexibility in it. I know that what we're doing very much fits in with their agenda, but how can they be involved? Should there be a memorandum of understanding or equivalent with them, or is it simply to promote and publicise what we're doing?
So in terms of, thank you very much for the questions. In terms of the length, yeah, you're absolutely right. What we've tried to build in, the length is decided around the actual standard and the framework, so it's not just unique to Manchester City Council. And you know, the Skills Funding Agency changed that to a year and a day, so that to try and stop people just churning through apprenticeships, and that's what we don't want to see. So that's what we've built in within the GM, is that if it takes a little bit longer, it takes a little bit longer. But also it's that kind of sustainability at the end, so the guaranteed interview at the end, what is the succession planning of that individual, so that's built into the framework that we've started to talk about and starting to develop, so that you don't get that people are just, and then the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one. So yeah, you're absolutely right, you know, it could be longer, yeah, that's absolutely fine, but it is about making sure that there is succession planning for every young person at the end, or adult within that, and that will start prior to them finishing. So you build that into the actual programme, just to make sure that people aren't just falling off the other side. In terms of JCP, actually across Greater Manchester we do have really good working relationships with JCP, particularly around our work and health and our working well programmes, and the work that we are looking to do. So JCP are supporting us with our looked after children work around the school readiness and the life readiness. And actually what we want to do is, yes, promote apprenticeships and promote the vacancies and all of that, but actually how do we work with them as a public sector to get the value that we want to bring on apprenticeships in terms of them, because they will be levy payers as well. So again, a lot of work we can do with them, and also breaking down some of the barriers as to why people can't move on to an apprenticeship. JCP hold a lot of information as to that. So actually, if you are a young people and you start an apprenticeship, sometimes it impacts your housing benefits within your household. So there are a lot of barriers that we need to work through, and they're really up for doing that with us.
Hope that's it. Question-wise, nothing, no pressing questions. That's good. So we need to note that report. I actually. Pretty comprehensive, that, so thank you, and it seems like a reasonable approach, so I commend the approach. We need, so if we can note the report, and we've got to agree a preferred, I think I just need you back really, or the relevant member, probably I would say 3-4 months, something like that. In that we've got to keep on board with the progress, and that applies to the school readiness as well. So great, thank you for that. And we'll move on. Thank you very much. So moving on, role of the Corporate Issues and Reform Overview and Scrutiny Committee in respect of Greater Manchester Strategy. The Corporate Issues and Reform, how do you get that on a business card? That was my only comment that I got from a colleague. So, over to Gwyn.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. On the last occasion, I think it was Councillor Butterworth asked for just a bit of an explanation around how this committee's work fitted into Priority 8 of the GMS, which is Safer and Stronger Communities. And the outcomes for that are set out in paragraph 4.4, which are people feeling safe and that they belong, reduced crime, reoffending and antisocial behaviour, and increased support for victims of crime, and more sustainable GM neighbourhoods. If we just go slightly back over the governance position, statutorily the CA is obliged to set up overview and scrutiny committees for its functions, and its functions are either wholly GMCA functions or functions of the Mayor that are general functions, and they're set out in the report. And your powers are to review and scrutinise, and there are powers to make reports and recommendations. Now, in relation to police and crime functions, they are not general functions of the PCC, the Mayor in that capacity, and the overview of the Mayor performing his PCC functions is something to be undertaken by the Police and Crime Panel. So if the thread is the Mayor is holding the Chief Constable to account, then it's the function of the Police and Crime Panel to look at the Mayor's performance in that regard. And so if the issue is something you're benchmarking against the police and crime plan, then that would be something for the police and crime panel rather than yourself. But you will obviously be interested in perhaps crime statistics. You might be interested in crime in relation to fire matters, which are clearly within your remit. And I could think of a couple of examples, like the Treacle campaign, which is a multi-agency campaign which looks at reducing antisocial behaviour over the bonfire period. You might very well be interested in what the success rate was in reducing antisocial behaviour. Other areas might be attacks on firefighters. You might be interested in those sort of areas. So in relation to matters that are within your remit, you can scrutinise and use the full range of your powers of calling. Excuse me. So calling includes delaying the implementation of a decision and asking for it to be reconsidered. But if it's a matter that really falls within the scrutiny of the police and crime panel, your powers are limited, and they are limited to reports and recommendations. So I hope that helps. If anybody has any questions, I'll try to answer.
John?
Yeah, I'd like to refer to conclusion in this report, which is item 6. And I refer to 6.2, which relates to priority 8 in the new edition of the Greater Manchester Strategy, where it says to continue to reduce fires. This is health and well-being. Continue to reduce fires and their associated costs through taking a tougher approach to fire safety across the public and residential estate to keep our residents safe. Fire and rescue functions fall firmly within the remit of this committee. And there are also mayoral general functions and the powers to call in, etc. Shortly after the election of the mayor, a fire committee was set up in Greater Manchester, consisting of 15 members. I would like to refer to a press release that was released by the Combined Authority when this fire committee was instituted. And I quote from the press release, "As part of his role, Andy Burnham has responsibility for Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service, replacing the former Fire Authority. The Fire Committee will oversee day-to-day functions of the service, including monitoring operations, performance and finances." So that is in direct conflict with item 8, priority 8 of the Greater Manchester Strategy. So one needs to ask, why a fire committee? Is it the intention of the Greater Manchester Combined Authority to get rid of the fire committee before it's really even started? That's what I want the answer to.
I haven't got an answer to that. I've got a couple of notes here. Have you got an answer to this, Gwyn?
Well, Councillor Bell, I think the purpose of this committee is to scrutinise the decisions in relation to fire and rescue, including any decisions made by the fire committee. So fire doesn't have a scrutiny role as such. Fire will have delegated functions, and this committee can scrutinise those functions.
So,
but it still hasn't answered my point, and I think this should be pursued by this because it's a duplication of effort. Because it's arguing one against the other. We can't have them both. We've either got to have one, this committee dealing with it, or a fire committee dealing with it. Now, I know that the mayor has his deputy, and Baroness Younger is in fact dealing with police and fire combined. But as you see, it's total conflict. You can't have. Why is it duplication?
Pastor Susan.
Yeah, I am not an expert here, but my understanding of the scrutiny legislation is that this is the only committee that actually has statutory status. The Mayor is entitled to convene a fire committee, but as I understand it, it's advisory to him. The kind of the legal buck stops with this committee in terms of discharging its, proper scrutiny of fire. There might be other advice and, obviously detailed work being undertaken. I'm not sure where we are up to with the actual terms of reference for the fire committee. I think that would be helpful once they've been fully agreed. But you are the body that has been vested via statute with the legal scrutiny function.
So I've just got a comment from David first.
Yes, just to reiterate what Susan said, I think that it's understandable that the Mayor would want a committee to advise him or talk to him on more day-to-day issues of the way the fire service runs and day-to-day performance, because we've really not got the capacity to do that on a regular basis. But when push comes to shove, that really is advising him and he makes the decision, one presumes. But as you say, we are the body which is charged with the oversight of this. So certainly in terms of policy development and overall performance, then we're the one that can call in any decision. So there is a duplication there, and perhaps it needs to be clarified, the role, because our role is laid down. Their role is a more day-to-day role and should not impinge on our role, and that needs to be clarified.
So what I've found interest in here is it's pretty clear we've not got an awful lot to do with police, really. We're just touching on the periphery. But it's pretty clear we have 100% to do with the scrutiny of fire. Now, I totally accept the Mayor can get any man and his dog to advise him about fire, which effectively is what that committee appears to be. It's not a statement of fact. It appears to be. Could we have a similar report, perhaps at the next meeting, because I think this is quite pressing. If we are responsible for scrutinising fire, that is nearly one of the biggest responsibilities we have. If there's a disaster.
It's on the agenda, yeah.
Yeah, but it's right up there. So I think if it is in the work programme, great. If it is on the agenda, great. But I think I need a similar report to this one with respect to policing, which I'm quite content. We're not in charge of police, somebody else is, okay. But fire, I think it's pretty clear. So we need to really outline what the advisory board does and how that they interact with us, because they could be advising things that we're not. Do we need to scrutinise what they're advising, etc.? Over to Gwyn. Would you like to comment?
Well, hopefully things will be much clearer once the fire committee has its terms of reference, so we can set those out for you. Then you'll know what you are to scrutinise. And I would just say that it's analogous to the transport situation, where we have committees for Transport for Greater Manchester, and their decisions in turn are subject to scrutiny by the overall scrutiny committees.
Any further comments from the committee? John McGann.
Thanks, Chair. It's almost listening to that we should, I don't want to create work for this committee, but almost to the point where we should be getting an update on a regular basis once that fire committee is in. And that could even be at every meeting that we have, because if they're going off at a tangent to what we want, and we're in a position that we're supposed to be 100% in charge of the situation, then which may be too late for us to do anything about things. So.
I would echo that. Some comment. I'll come back to you, David, then Colin.
Just briefly, we've got issues that we need to look at possibly, because we'll be asked about them. There's the aftermath of Grenfell, and I don't know to what extent the Mayor's fire functions, how that links into that. In Salford, we're up to our armpits in it. There are weekly meetings. Our scrutiny committee that deals with that issue has a monthly report. The Deputy Mayor chairs a weekly committee. Manchester will be the same because of the number of tower blocks. Now, I don't know what the Mayor's role at his level is, but if there is a role, then we need to be looking at that very definitely.
Colin.
Just to suggest, really, that perhaps then we just need to receive the minutes of the fire committee, as it were, and they're just on our agenda for noting or for commenting on, etc. And it gives us the opportunity to oversee what may or may not be happening in terms of that committee. But it also raises the question whether there are any other committees that we might have oversight of, in which case do we need to do the same with those minutes, or reports arising from their meetings.
I think it's all part of the teething issues of everybody understanding what their roles are. But I think it's quite clear from the committee that we feel a responsibility for this that actually at this point we've got no clarity on. So I think it's quite important. So I'll pass that. Could I ask you to do that for next? Similar report to the police one with respect to this. I'm sure it's on the agenda, but let's just re-emphasise that. Any further? Sorry, Stella.
Thank you, Chair. It's just, is it worth then suggesting that we have it as a standing item on the agenda, and even if the fire committee hasn't met that particular, since our particular previous meeting, we can always just pass straight on, but it means it wouldn't get missed out.
I think that's fair. I think we'll just perhaps review that as part of the work. We're coming to the work programme next, so maybe we have a standing agenda for a couple of months and just see how we feel about it. It's evolving, but I would sort of agree with that. But I think we just need to work that into the work programme. Yeah. Any further comments on fire? On that, actually, that's the fire strayed. Actually, totally strayed from the police. Do we understand where we are with respect to? Well, not police, but with respect to community, safer and stronger communities. Are we happy what we're doing there? Oh, right, so we'll thank you for bringing that to us. That's great. Which seamlessly brings us on to the work programme, which is quite onerous, really. There's a lot. We've got a lot to cover. So 19th of December, it is fire, so that will help. Let's really thrash that out. And we've got an overview of budget. I don't think there's going to be any space for anything else there at all. Has anybody got anything they'd like to contribute in there? No. Which then takes us to January, budget again and homelessness. We've got to be confirmed. Do we know who might, are we any comments from the officers who might be presenting that?
We would be a mayor or a senior. I think they're appointing assistant portfolio holders, but we would expect a senior politician also to be there.
Fine, appreciate it. I would like to sort of treat that in the same way we've focused in on school readiness, in that, again, we should be able to see some results over a period of 3 or 4 years. The remainder of Andy's term, we should be able to see some sort of results, and that's our job. And again,
can I just ask something about
yes,
that?
sir.
It's just, I know from speaking to the chair of the, what's it called, Housing Planning and Environment Scrutiny,
yeah.
And that they thought homelessness was their dibs. So I think we probably just need to clarify that, don't we, really?
Yeah. Do you want me to go?
Yeah.
I think there is certainly, there's kind of two aspects. There's actually the provision of units and the kind of, and then there's the management of the people and the services that are about prevention of homelessness. So it's more a public services reform thing. However, it will be a matter for discussion at the chair's meeting tomorrow, and we'll see how we go with that. But it falls firmly within public services reform in terms of the person aspects of it, rather than the kind of housing policy side.
No, I don't disagree at all. I just don't want two groups of councillors to be having the same discussion, sort of thing. Yeah.
I'm hoping we can agree where we all want to scrutinise, and the point of potentially cross-committee working groups. Who knows? Let's see what comes out of it. Certainly on that area, it might be necessary, it might not be necessary. It depends what we're looking at. So let's see what comes out of the joint meeting. Budgets, I'm concerned about the amount of time we've got for the budget, just still looking at January. You snuck in then. Great. So have you got any comments on how much time you feel we might need to scrutinise your budget?
I think in December it'll be a bit of an overview. I know you've had an overview, but just the work that's going on and the direction of travel on the budgets for December. And then what we'd said is in January, if there were particular areas you wanted to look at in more detail, we'd come back in January. That would feed into the CA considering the budgets at the end of January. So the timing is quite good. We'll have got a fair idea of where we're heading by the January meeting. And you could, if at the December meeting you thought there were other areas that the two other scrutiny committees should look at in relation to their own services and budgets, you could refer matters to them. So it's hard to think what it is, but if it was in relation to the spatial framework or something, you could ask the appropriate scrutiny committee to look at that. For example, you would have the fire budget directly, you'd have the public sector reform budget directly under your remit as well as the overall arrangements.
Have you any idea when the papers might be ready? In that, I know we're 4 to 5 weeks off at this point, but actually, it's probably. I'd like the committee to have them for at least 2 weeks, because it takes a fair amount to digest these things and actually drill into it. Can you comment on that? Have you any plan? I wouldn't want to be receiving them 2 days before.
No. We would aim to get them out by the due deadline. 2 weeks maybe a bit earlier. I mean, the overview. We're going through a process with leaders at the moment, looking at what the issues are. So there are presentations of the big picture stuff that are being produced at the moment. So you could have a version of those quite early on, and then to look in more detail as you know, as we get close to the town, we'll have a better idea where we're going. We've not had the funding settlement for local government yet. We don't know what our borrowing powers are, so there's still quite a lot of unknowns. But the big picture stuff we should be able to give you a couple of weeks in advance. But it may be in the form of presentations by way of background information.
Whatever you've got as soon as you've got it, if we're going to digest it, because it's a fair amount to go through. So thank you for that. Any other comments on January at homelessness and budgets? No. So that then takes us February. It's looking like living wage and then communications, which is an area that we won't have touched on we've touched upon living wage. We had a bit of a presentation on that last time round from Andy. Does anybody want to bring anything else? I
suppose it might be fire, might it?
We got, potentially the report from fire. Should we take that decision? Can we note that to take a decision once we've had the full fire presentation next meeting, whether we want it as a standing? We'll know what our responsibilities are, but if we could note that to put on the agenda for next meeting.
So just on the living wage side, I mean, we have submitted an application and have been accredited, so a report might be quite short, I would think. Should give you time for, it depends how long you want for communications, but there might be a time for another sort of
interestingly,
half item.
that February is looking quite light on the face of it. Has anybody got any passion to bring anything into February?
You did mention leadership. Sorry. You did mention leadership of the GMCA as one of the as one area. That's quite an interesting one, of a kind of not one that normally people write reports about, but.
Comments, but I've no comment to make on that. Committee.
I don't know. I mean,
I don't think that. Colin.
Well, we have talked in the past. I mean, at the beginning of this municipal year, we were talking about issues relating to communication strategies or the mechanism by which the GMCA is intending to work. Maybe by then the picture might be a little clearer, and we might be able to use that as an opportunity to investigate those methods of communication, etc. Because part of the reason for setting up the task and finish group was to test out the communication system, if you like, for want of a better phrase. So perhaps it might be an opportunity to review the communication system at that point.
Actually, the concept of task and finish, I think we should drop into February and of putting the groups together, because by that time we'll have the joint chairs meeting. We'll have a better view of where we're going with that. So maybe put a note for task and... Yeah, you've done that. Great. Task and finish potentially for February, which then takes us to March. We're going to school readiness, a fresh report, and I think we'll just let that build. It might be fire. I don't think we need to flesh that out at this point in time. I think I'm quite comfortable with that. Which brings us to future meetings, which we've already got, 19th of December, 6 o'clock. Do we have a venue yet, or are we still working on that?
19th of December, the meeting's going to be held here in this room again, and that's a 6 o'clock start. The meeting in January, I'm struggling to get a room, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to get a room at Trafford Town Hall, so we'll have a meeting at Trafford.
That's good for me. Food's better here, but...
Not so good for us.
And on that, I think that's it. Has anybody got any pressing items they'd like to introduce? No?
Just a point of clarification, Chair. When you say drop the task and finish group into February, you're talking about the school readiness?
I'm talking about the whole concept of task and finish groups, because by that time we will have reviewed communications, and there's a passion from some members to have a task and finish on communications, i.e. getting a message what GM is out. By that time we'll have a little bit more clarity on fire. So we might be in a position to say, actually, these are areas we need to cover. We might not be.
Wasn't to defer the school readiness task and finish group to February?
No, I'm not. I will have some clarity. We've got no clarity, as you've brought in. Is it going to be cross-committee? We don't know that. We'll know that over the coming week and see what the other committees want to feed into it, by the time we get to the next meeting, we might be in a position to say, you know what, we've got 6 volunteers. That's a starting point. So, no, I'm not deferring it to February. School readiness we need to get on with, but by the time we get to February, we're in a broader position to do more, I would hope, than just school readiness. Yeah. Thank you very much all. Thank you for turning up. Appreciate it.
Cheers.
Thank you to the technical guys. Appreciate it.
I do not want to see the film. Yeah, these rotate. These things here are rotating. So every time